Now, the U.S. President Donald Trump is planning to extend his controversial travel ban to more countries. He made that announcement just a short time ago as he was leaving the World Economic Forum in Davos and heading back to Washington, D.C., where his impeachment trial is starting.
We have to be safe. Our country has to be safe. You see what's going on in the world. Our country has to be safe. So we have a very strong travel ban, and we'll be adding a few countries to it.
Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, to first discuss what he had to say on the travel ban. Was this expected at all?
We did hear this was in the works, but the White House, well, they said they were looking at adding countries, would not specify which ones. We now know Belarus, Burma, Nigeria, Tanzania, Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, and Sudan. Now, this is a pretty controversial policy. It was certainly controversial when it was first implemented because many thought that it equated to a Muslim ban, given some of the president's statements about Muslims on the campaign trail, the fact that it applied to Muslim-majority countries. In fact, it was even challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ultimately, a 5-4 decision back in 2018 that this could be upheld, that Iran, Libya, Syria, Somalia, and Yemen would still have this ban applied to them. The argument that the Trump administration has made all along is this is not about ethnicity, this is not about nationality or even religion, that this is about security protocol, and that these particular countries, now with these new ones added, are simply not complying with the strict protocols of the United States when it comes to biometrics, counterterrorism, basic security requirements. In fact, there were two countries that were initially on the original list, Iraq and Chad. They stepped up their game, if you will, when it comes to security, were removed from the list. And the White House is telling Al Jazeera that that is the case for these new countries that have been added. If they fall into compliance with U.S. security requirements, they will be able to be removed from that list.
All right. And Kimberly, he certainly had a lot to say on the impeachment trial currently underway in Washington. He's heading back to Washington. Just talk us through some of the highlights there.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shift in mood. The president had been at Davos, really quite upbeat as he mingled with the world's elites. But he seems to be shifting back into attack mode now, knowing that that Senate trial is set to begin again at 18 GMT and that he will be back in the United States almost face to face with his critics. And he seems to be attacking them head on. In fact, the president not only once again maintaining that he would like to have witnesses in this trial, as Democrats have been pushing for, but he says he can't because of national security. And he also used some pretty strong language. The president using a word I've never heard a president use before, calling Democrats, his opposition in all of this, sleazebags, which is certainly very shocking language. Still, the president maintains that he's committed no wrongdoing, and this is all just an agenda to remove him from office, something he says has been in the works, trying to keep him out of the political realm from the day he announced his candidacy. He's still fighting back. Take a listen.
It's a total hoax. It's a disgrace. They talked about their tremendous case, and it's all done, their tremendous case. They had no case. It's all a hoax. It's a con job, like Schiff. He's a corrupt politician.
The president is also continuing to distance himself from a man who has testified in, at least in television interviews, a man by the name of Lev Parnas, that he was a part of the president's parallel diplomacy towards Ukraine. The president distancing himself from Lev Parnas, saying, in fact, he was just a groupie who showed up at fundraisers. In the midst of all of this, the president also believes that fighting back against this impeachment, he believes is something very important and that history will look on him kindly. In fact, he said in his press conference there in Davos, I'm not enjoying it, but I think it's the greatest thing I've ever done for our country. So that's certainly his view. I'm not sure it's shared by everyone in the United States.
All right, Kimberly, we'll be speaking to you throughout the day for the time being. Thank you. So, as we mentioned, the U.S. Senate has now agreed on the rules for that impeachment trial of Donald Trump following nearly 13 hours of debate. Shihab Ratansi reports on a long opening day that stretched well into the night.
Our founders trusted the Senate to rise above short-term passions.
At the last moment, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell altered his proposed rules for the impeachment trial. Gone was the possibility that the evidence collected during the various House inquiries might not be entered into evidence in the Senate trial. And the Democratic Party House managers and White House lawyers would now have 3 days and not 2 to make their opening statements. That left the issue of witnesses and documents. House Democrats argued that they were withheld in the course of their inquiries into whether Donald Trump was withholding congressionally mandated military aid for Ukraine in return for an investigation into former Vice President Joe Biden, and that these must be produced in the Senate trial.
So Leader McConnell wants a trial with no existing evidence and no new evidence. A trial without evidence is not a trial. It's a cover-up.
The White House argues that the request for more evidence proves the Democrats don't have a strong case against the president.
They said in their brief, we have overwhelming evidence, and they're afraid to make their case. Think about it. Think about it. It's common sense. Overwhelming evidence to impeach the President of the United States, and then they come here on the first day and they say, you know what, we need some more evidence.
The White House also argues that the documents and witnesses are privileged. In order to shape foreign policy, the president must be able to have private deliberations with advisors, and that's an argument rejected by the Democrats.
Make the argument that the president's conduct here was conduct that every president should be allowed to engage in, and I think that most Americans don't believe that.
For that, Mr. Chief Justice, I yield back.
The Democrats failed to pass their amendments. Under McConnell's rules, though, there will be another chance to debate the need for more witnesses and documents, but only after opening arguments and the cross-examination of the House managers and White House lawyers.
You just watch.
Donald Trump was reported to be monitoring proceedings while attending the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. His position remains unchanged.
That whole thing is a hoax.
So the Democrats now have 3 days beginning on Wednesday to make their opening arguments. The White House says its lawyers may not need that much time and certainly hopes that all of this will be wrapped up before the State of the Union address on February the 4th with Donald Trump's acquittal. Shia Britansi, Al Jazeera, Washington.